The little cloud painter high above the quilt of hills, where goats looked like seeds and rivers like silver threads. A small cloud named Lumo floated alone. The elder clouds called him Thimble Cloud because he was no larger than a cottage roof and twice as shy. He listened when they rumbled about winds and weather, about storms and schedules, and the proper, dignified way to shade a summer afternoon. But what Lumo loved most, more than rain, more than shadow, were sunsets. Every evening, he drifted to the western edge of the sky and watched the world prepare for rest. The horizon would soften. The sun would lower with a yawn. Then the grand old clouds, the masters, would glide forward, carrying colors like secret songs. They dipped into the light, and the light clung to them, spilling across the world in ribbons of gold, in blushes of peach, in threads of lavender. Children below would point, and windows would glow, and the day, no matter how hard or hurried, would forgive itself and close. Lumo wanted to make that closing. He wanted to paint the sky that said, "It's all right now. Sleep." But he was small, and his edges were fuzzy, and the masters were very serious. A sunset, they boomed, must be even, measured, blended by breath, not whim. When Lumo tried to ask how to begin, the masters swelled larger and hid the sun without meaning to, and he quieted again. One evening, when the light was turning the color of warm tea, a swift wind came skipping through the high air. It tugged at Lumo like a playful cousin. "Why so heavy, little puff?" "I want to learn," Lumo murmured, "but I don't know where to put the first color." "Anywhere," said the wind, twirling. "Anywhere can be a beginning." The words tickled him. Lumo crept to the edge of the light and, very carefully, dipped. The late sun drew a soft smear across his belly, pale honey, almost shy. He held his breath, terrified he would drip it, and drifted forward. A faint line trailed behind him, the thinnest whisper of gold. It was crooked. It was too small. It was also his. He tried again. He dipped a little deeper and came away with a blush of peach. He moved slower this time, letting the color rest. The peach met the gold and did not argue. It lay beside it, companionable. The sky below changed by one small feeling. "Huh," barked a master from far above, amused rather than angry. The thimble spills paint. Lumo's edges prickled with embarrassment. He wanted to shrink until he was mist in a fern, but the swift wind leaned against him, steady as a friend. "Don't flee. The first mark is the bravest." So Lumo stayed. He added a mild lavender that made the gold hum. He washed a breath of apricot along the ribs of a cloud bank that had forgotten it liked to be beautiful. People below glanced up from their doors and smiled without knowing why. A baker lowered his awning and sighed. A mother lifted her baby to the window and whispered, "Look." When the sun finally dropped, tired but pleased, the moon rose and looked at the soft brushwork left across the west. She shone a private beam at Lumo. "Small cloud," she said in a voice like a lullaby, "your gentleness shows." Lumo drifted to a still pocket of night and trembled with joy. He had painted the day to sleep. The morning brought courage and clumsiness in equal measure. Lumo followed the masters, learning the names of winds, the looms that wove high skies, the low, slow breezes that folded fog over fields. He watched how light behaved, the way it slid off rain like beads, the way it stayed when the air was tender. He practiced far from the villages, staining empty horizons where only the March geese would see, and even they were generous in their chattering way. Some days were messy. He'd take too much tangerine, and the world would feel noisy. He'd ask Violet to sit beside Apricot, and they would sulk until the wind persuaded them to share their edges. A master would occasionally mutter, "Blend, lad, blend." Lumo would try again. The swift wind never left him long. "You're learning what the sky wants tonight," it would say. "It's new every time." One afternoon, a storm marched in from the sea, loud as drums. The masters rolled before it, stacking themselves like slate. Lightning stitched the gray like hurried handwriting. Lumo, curious and a little thrilled, drifted at the edges where rain felt like cool pins. The storm pounded over forests and rooftops and ferries. The world held still and endured. When it ended, everything shone, leaves slick, streets gleaming, the sea rinsed to a deeper blue. The sun slipped from a rent in the cloud rind, late and low. Lumo felt the moment. The world was tired. It needed a gentle ending. He dipped into the leftover light and came away with a fragile, milk-warm gold. He sighted across the wet roofs. He found a sleepy pink and brushed it behind the steeple so the bell might rest. He lifted a whisper of lavender to the mountain, and the mountain, which had been braced all day, let its shoulders go. Down in the harbor, an old fisherman sat on a crate, mending a net with sore hands. He paused and looked up. The sky's quiet kindness reached him. He smiled to himself and said, "Not to anyone. Good." Then he finished the knot without hurry. Word spread among the masters. "The thimble is not careless." They rumbled to each other. "He listens." After that, Lumo was invited closer to the great canvases. He learned the oldest rule, older than weather: paint for those who will sleep beneath your work. On evenings when sheep would be sheared the next morning, he let the wool of the sky be soft. On nights before a market, when bakers would rise at 3, he made the west simple and sweet, with one kind color and a second to hold it. On the first cool evening of autumn, when chimneys tried their smoke and children tried their longer sleeves, he poured a transparent amber that made every oak consider becoming gold. But Lumo kept a secret wish he told only the wind. One day he wanted to paint a farewell so gentle that even grief could rest under it. That wish waited. Winter found the valley in a hush. Frost traced the edges of every leaf. The river wore a thin glass mask and pretended stillness while it sang underneath. People walked with scarves over their mouths, voices steaming. Sunsets were quick, small cups of light knocked back by night. Lumo learned winter colors: the pale pink that doesn't boast, the blue that forgives the cold, the gold that remembers apples. He learned restraint. He learned that quiet is also paint. One late winter day, a bell tolled from the hill town, the slow bell that says a hard goodbye. The whole valley heard it and moved more carefully. Lumo hovered above, listening. The wind pressed its cool cheek to his. "Tonight," it whispered. When the sun reached for the horizon, Lumo gathered himself. He dipped, not into the loud copper of autumn or the juicy orange of summer, but into the honest gold that comes from doing what you must. He brushed it thin so it wouldn't insist. He found a lavender so light it was almost memory and set it beside the gold, a hand held without words. Between them, he tucked a breath of rose, the kind that blushes even when no one watches. He left spaces. He let the evening breathe. Down below, a procession moved toward the little church. An old woman, hands linked with a granddaughter, paused on the steps and looked up. The sky did not distract or perform. It simply rested open, a quiet lap to lean into. The woman exhaled, long, like someone setting down a heavy basket, and squeezed the small hand in hers. The child squeezed back. The bell finished. The west closed gently, as if drawing a blanket to the chin. "Beautiful," a master murmured, the word a rare gift. Lumo did not glow with pride. He simply felt right, as though a loose knot in his vapor had come tidy. Spring unbuttoned the valley. Willows flared new green. Lambs invented their legs. Rain returned in fine laces. The world laughed more. Lumo tried a playful choral now and then, a spurt of peach that made the river look cheeky. He discovered a trick for evenings after big winds, a wide wash of butterlight to smooth the rumpled day. He learned how to leave a bright window in the west for late workers to find their way home without hurry. One afternoon, a child named Mira chased a paper pinwheel along the lane until it snagged on a fence post. She tugged and huffed and finally freed it, just as the sky began to arrange itself for evening. She tipped her face up. "Who paints you?" she asked, not expecting an answer. The swift wind, who indulged children as it did small clouds, swooped the question higher. "She wonders about you," it teased Lumo. Lumo felt oddly shy. He didn't mind being seen, but being wondered about was new. He looked down at the small figure in the lane and thought of what she might need. Nothing grand, nothing sharp. Perhaps a color that says, "You can keep your small treasure, and the day will keep you." He dipped into a tender apricot and brushed it above her lane. He rested a pearl pink exactly where she would look. He offered a hush of lavender that would ride the rooftops all the way to her window. Mira did not know these benevolences by name. She only felt a comfortable softness spread through her chest, like warm bread. She spun her pinwheel slower, then stopped, then smiled at nothing in particular, which is often how gratitude looks from far away. The seasons cycled and Lumo grew. Not in size. He never became a mountain of a cloud, but in discernment. He could tell how a day had been by the way doors closed. He learned to read laundry lines, 3 shirts and a patience, a small dress and a hope. He painted for weary backs and bright eyes, for new parents and lonely benches, for fishermen watching the tide and bakers timing their dough. He learned that the sky wasn't his to decorate. It was the world's to rest under, and he was its caretaker for a few minutes each day. The masters began to ask his opinion. Too much copper? One would rumble. Perhaps hold it a little, Lumo would say gently. Today was loud. They chuckled and obliged, secretly pleased. One summer evening, heat shimmered even at dusk. The fields buzzed with insects stitching the day closed. Children, scrubbed and pajama sweet, sat on stoops with cups of cool water. Lumo prepared a long, slow gradient, melting tangerine into pink, pink into violet, violet into the first patient blue of night. He lingered over the village square where a violinist played a tune he knew by heart, though he had no ears. The bow's soft scrape seemed to draw his colors across the sky exactly where they belonged. As the last smear of sun withdrew, stars arrived like polite guests who know when to speak and when to listen. The moon climbed her familiar stair and looked over the valley's roofs and trees and sleeping animals and quiet hearts. She tipped her light to Lumo again. "Your work," she said, "has made a bridge between wait and rest." Lumo floated, light as breath. "I only paint what the evening tells me." "That," said the moon, "is why the evening tells you." A few days later, a traveling painter set his easel on the hill road at dusk. He mixed pigments and watched the west. He squinted at the streak of steady gold and the modest pink and the lavender that understood its place, and he tried to imitate them. But he couldn't catch the feeling of ease that slipped into his bones as the colors deepened. He laughed softly, set down his brush, and simply watched. When he packed up in the blue hour, he left the canvas blank. It was the truest record he knew. Some things you carry in your chest, not on paper. Years turned, though the sky pretended not to count. Lumo learned to leave sometimes, on nights when thunder needed the stage, when moonlight wanted to echo on snow. He learned that good painting includes knowing when not to paint. He taught a clutch of shy young vapors how to hold color without startling it. He told them the oldest rule. He told them the secret wish. And once, on an early autumn evening, he felt that wish again. In a farmhouse at the edge of the fields, a man sat alone at a table with an open notebook and a closed throat. A wooden chair opposite him waited in a way that made the room ache. He did not cry. He looked out the window because there was nowhere else to look. Lumo gathered the sky's softer tools. He laid a broad linen of gold, almost invisible at first, then growing until the edges of the world smoothed. He brushed in a rose that remembered the first time the man had laughed too hard in that kitchen and spilled tea. He drew a lavender stripe as thin as a whispered song. He left a seam of bare blue so the stars would have a quiet path to follow when they came. The man did not think, "What fine color harmony." He just found, for the first time in many evenings, that his breath went all the way down. He put a hand on the empty chair and said, "I can go to bed." And he did. Lumo watched the farmhouse window darken. He did not glow. He dimmed, in fact, to match the hush he had made. The swift wind circled him once, affectionate as always. "You did it, little painter." "Not little," a master corrected, passing by with a dignified roll. "Exact." Autumn burned and gentled. Winter returned with its clear bells. Spring rehearsed green. Summer made a banquet of light. And every evening, above roofs and roads and rivers and quiet, ordinary aches and ordinary joys, a small cloud listened for what the day needed and laid down the kind of colors that taught the world how to put itself to bed. If you looked up on those evenings, and if you looked with the kind of attention children have and grown-ups remember for a moment, you could see where the brush lifted and the color was allowed to breathe. You could feel your shoulders lower without being told. You might even think, for no particular reason, "Good," as the fisherman once did, or smile at nothing in particular, as Mira did with her pinwheel. And if you listened closely, very closely, you might hear the swift wind telling the newest little clouds the oldest rule and Lumo's quiet voice adding the newest one. Asterisk, paint with your heart and leave room for the night to sing. Asterisk, then the stars would take their places, the moon would keep her watch, and the valley would rest. Carried, as always, on the soft, careful colors of a small cloud who knew that art, at day's end, is another word for kindness.